a disease feared since antiquity, became a growing concern in Europe during the Middle Ages. A disease so terrible, Byzantine preachers dubbed those afflicted by it the walking corpses. First, the victims of the disease would show reddish skin lesions along with sensory loss in the hands and feet. Then, the lesions spread, which led to even more sensory loss across the limbs. Finally, facial and limb deformities, loss of motor skills, destruction of bones, and death. Truly, a frightening way to go. But this was sadly a reality for 1 in 30 people during the Middle Ages. By the early modern period, leprosy had become less common in Europe, though it never truly vanished. The reasons for this decline are still debated by historians today. Today, leprosy persists globally, with hundreds of thousands of new cases each year, primarily in India, Brazil, and Indonesia. Though rare in Europe now, its historical impact remains significant. So buckle up as we explore what the disease is and where it came from, the life of a leprosy patient, and finally, the societal impact the disease had. So, what is leprosy? This YouTube channel is about history, not medicine or bacteriology. So I'll summarize to the best of my ability, with a historical twist of course. First, we have to talk about semantics. Today, we refer to leprosy as Hansen's disease. In the classical era, however, leprosy was referred to as elephantiasis, or elephant's disease, due to the thickened, rough skin it caused. Lepra in the classical era is the Greek word for scaly, possibly meaning psoriasis. Today, we call elephantiasis lymphatic filariasis. It is not related to leprosy. It was only in the 12th to 16th century that the term leprosy referred to Hansen's disease and not psoriasis or other skin conditions. A final layer of complexity is added. It's believed that the disease may have changed over time, potentially influencing the disease's presentation throughout history. I know, it was confusing for me to follow as well. To keep things simple and ensure clarity, we will call it leprosy in this video. Second, let's talk about what it actually is. Leprosy is a chronic infection caused by the bacteria Mycobacterium leprae. It mainly affects the skin, nerves, and eyes, causing numbness, skin lesions, and if untreated, deformities. In 1873, Norwegian scientist Gerhard Hansen identified Mycobacterium leprae as the cause of leprosy, making it one of the first diseases linked to a specific bacterium. Spread through prolonged close contact with respiratory droplets of an infected person, COVID flashback, and most people have natural immunity. So, where did leprosy come from? The leading theory is that Alexander the Great's army brought the disease back to Egypt from India in the 4th century BCE. This is highly likely to be correct as there is evidence of leprosy, both written and archaeological, coming from India as far as the 20th century BCE. There is also evidence in the archaeological record of leprosy being present in Egypt during the time of the Ptolemaic kings. So we know that leprosy was in Egypt, but what happened then? Well, the Romans happened. Basically, the Romans ruled over a vast empire, spreading from the Near East to Northern Africa to Western Europe and parts of Central Europe. The Romans brought with them urbanization, trade, and much more. But the Romans encountered the disease as well, especially in Egypt. Pliny the Elder describes the disease. Elephantiasis belongs to the category of chronic afflictions. The whole body is affected to the point that even the bones are altered. When the disease has progressed to a certain point, the toes and hands collapse under the effect of the tumor, and a mild fever appears. But Pliny also states that at his time, which is the 1st century CE, the disease had reached Italy at some point, but was quickly snuffed out. He does, however, describe leprosy having a catastrophic effect on the population of Egypt. It was only much later in the 4th century, when the empire became more interconnected, that the spread of leprosy became more apparent in the historical record in Europe. The 4th century is a turning point in our story today. This century is mostly known for the establishment of Constantinople. Upon its creation, Emperor Constantine was caught flat-footed when people of all social stratas started contracting leprosy. His son, Constantine II, had to commission the building of asylums for those afflicted with leprosy because the disease spread rapidly throughout the empire's society. The disease had taken hold, at least in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. Many thinkers tried to tackle the problem. Some thought it was related to sinfulness, others thought it was a godly disease, others believed they needed healing. After all, Jesus, whose words they followed, famously cleansed a leprosy patient from their affliction. Basil of Caesarea built a hospital, the Basiliad, with a special unit for those with leprosy. This trend would continue in the Eastern Roman Empire, where leprosy hospitals known as leprosaria were built. We'll talk more about these in medieval European society coming later in the video. We here see a non-traditional approach to handling leprosy. Before this point, in the Near East at least, those with leprosy lived on the fringes of society. The Eastern Romans, however, took a more humane approach to the disease, as described by Gregory of Nyssa. Because the leper has nothing from home and is completely incapable of becoming a hired person, he is of necessity completely lacking in the basic supports of life. He is bound like a prisoner by the disease. Figures like John Chrysostom also delivered sermons that it is society's obligation to help those with leprosy. Now that we know leprosy had taken hold of the eastern part of the Roman Empire, how did it reach the West? The transmission of leprosy from east to west appears to follow a pattern. A few isolated cases appear, followed by more documented evidence which indicates wider presence of the disease. Several factors can explain the spread of leprosy, including increased trade and communication, environmental and socioeconomic conditions, and the movement of armies along major routes of communication. The movement of civilians, including merchants, slaves, and pilgrims, also likely played a role. Cases of leprosy were especially visible at major traffic points, possibly because these were the sites where charity was distributed. The presence of a leper in 4th century Paris who was kissed by Saint Martin is symbolic, but it may also illustrate the prevalence of leprosy in the early Middle Ages. So we finally arrive at the Middle Ages, marked by the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century. Leprosy was present in Western Europe but not as prevalent as in the East. The region's lower levels of urbanization compared to the highly urbanized Near East likely restricted the widespread transmission of the disease. Additionally, the decline of Roman infrastructure, including international trade networks, further hindered the spread of leprosy. Though less common than in the East, leprosy was sporadically present in Western Europe during the 5th and 6th centuries, with evidence of localized outbreaks. The Council of Orleans in 549 provided guidance on assisting those affected by leprosy, indicating that the disease was recognized as a public health concern and that there was a need for organized support. Now that we are in the Middle Ages and we know where leprosy came from, how was life for those who suffered from the disease? Let's not kid ourselves, life wasn't pleasant for those with leprosy during the Middle Ages. They were forced to live outside city gates and only allowed into town on rare special days. To avoid spreading fear, they had to wear distinctive clothing and carry a leper clapper or bell to announce their presence. They were banned from church services, stripped of their legal rights, and tragically, some were even burned or buried alive. After the First Crusade, we again see an influx of leprosy within Western European communities. Pilgrims, crusaders, religious migrants, merchants, new trade routes, and more moved from east to west again, bringing the disease to the now more urbanized European settlements. The problem of leprosy could no longer be ignored, or at least unmanaged. You see, as we mentioned before, Western European societies let lepers live outside the city gates. But imagine large settlements like Paris or London with dozens of lepers outside the city gates. This problem needed to be tackled. The population shift from east to west didn't only bring leprosy, it also brought back concepts, technologies, and innovations. One such innovation is the aforementioned leprosaria. These dedicated, unique institutions were designed to care for people with leprosy. Far from just places of isolation, these facilities often provided a sense of community, spiritual purpose, and physical care for the afflicted. Rooted in Christian charity, leprosaria connected lepers with the broader religious community. In fact, many were run like religious institutions, complete with communal prayers, structured routines, and a focus on spiritual redemption. Rules inspired by monastic life governed daily activities, and special provisions were made for residents during religious festivals, such as allotments of lamb at Pentecost and pork at Christmas. These small gestures reflected the belief that lepers had a unique closeness to Christ, their suffering seen as a reflection of His. They fostered tight-knit communities where residents worked together, maintained autonomy, and even participated in their own governance. Some records reveal multi-generational bonds among leprosaria staff and residents, highlighting the enduring relationships within these communities. These leprosaria were so prevalent that Matthew of Paris, a monk, estimated there to be around 19,000 leprosaria in the Christian world, 2,000 of which were in France. Now, these numbers should be taken with a grain of salt, but there is plenty of evidence of leprosy-related churches and institutions existing, some of which you can still visit today. Even though these institutions existed, leprosy still captured the imagination of the general public, even surfacing in literature of the time. An example can be found in Béruult's version of Tristan and Isolde, where King Mark considers executing Isolde for her betrayal. The leprosy patients come with a different suggestion, which is, well, more grotesque than execution, and I am unsure whether I can repeat this on YouTube. Let's just say that it portrayed the leprosy sufferers as morally degenerate. Another incident is the case of King Charles VI, more colloquially referred to as King Charles the Mad. On a military expedition towards Brittany, King Charles and his army ran into a leprosy patient. He warned the king about betrayal within his ranks. Shortly after, the king went mad with the thought of betrayal and attacked his companions. As we see, there is clearly a duality taking place. Leprosy patients had autonomous societies where they practiced some form of democracy, building their own somewhat parallel societies. On the other hand, they were still stigmatized and marginalized by general society. I cannot help but wonder, if the religious aspect of leprosy was not present, would they have been given these freedoms? And there you have it, the story of leprosy in the Middle Ages. If you found this video even half as interesting as a medieval leprosarium's Christmas feast, pork apparently, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Check out my sources below, leave a comment, and see you in the next one.